In the spring of 1981, when Patagonia's mountains were still capped with snow and the air smelled of dust and pine, a bus painted in fading yellow pulled away from the small town of San Isidro. Inside it were 22 children, aged 12 to 14, and their two teachers, Senora Alvarez, the science teacher who wore her hair in a tight bun, and Mr. Ortega, a history teacher with a kind voice and a fondness for storytelling. They were heading toward the Valle del Condor, a remote canyon about 40 kilometers north, for a simple class project to photograph rock layers and sketch the local formations for their geography fair. It was the kind of field trip every child looked forward to. An adventure away from classrooms, chalk dust, and strict bells. Parents had gathered at the school gate that morning, waving handkerchiefs and shouting reminders. Don't forget your sandwiches. Keep your scarves on. Stay close to the teachers. The children's laughter echoed down the street as the bus rumbled away, dust spiraling up behind it. Someone's transistor radio played a pop song, and the youngest student sang along. Off-key, but fearless, Senora Alvarez had brought a stack of worksheets about fossils. Mr. Ortega carried his leather journal, where he wrote notes for the stories he told at the end of each school day. Near the back of the bus, a Polaroid camera passed from hand to hand, snapping blurry photos of faces pressed against glass, sunlight streaking across their smiles. The children called themselves La Clase de los Valientes, the brave class. The nickname came from a school contest weeks earlier, when they'd camped overnight in the courtyard and claimed they weren't afraid of the dark. It stuck, and now, on the way to the valley, they wore it like a badge. The driver, a quiet man named Ricardo, kept his cap low and his eyes on the winding mountain road. He'd driven school routes for 2 decades and knew these passes by heart. Or so he thought. Around noon, the bus stopped at a viewpoint where the valley opened wide below. The students spilled out, their voices filling the air. They unpacked sandwiches, apple juice, and chocolate bars, sharing bites, trading chips. Mr. Ortega posed them in front of the bus for a photo. Say cheese for history, he said, the Polaroid word, and a white rectangle slid out. He waved it gently as the image began to bloom. 22 grinning faces against a backdrop of cliffs and clouds. They didn't know that would be their last photograph. By early afternoon, clouds thickened over the peaks. The wind grew strange, not stronger, but colder, carrying a distant hum that seemed to rise from the valley floor. Senora Alvarez frowned at the sky. We should head back soon, she told Ricardo. Storms roll fast here. He nodded, started the engine, and turned the bus toward the road that curved along the canyon's edge. At 3:47 p.m., Ricardo radioed the nearest dispatch station, Bus 14A. Engine trouble, he said. Temperature gauge read. We're near kilometer 108. By the gorge. Shouldn't take long. The dispatcher asked if he needed help. Through the static, Ricardo's laugh came faintly. No. Just. Then the line crackled. A burst of wind drowned out his voice. The last sound recorded was the children's laughter, distant and muffled, followed by silence. The signal never came back. That night, when the bus didn't return, parents assumed it was a delay. The road was rough. Maybe they'd camped somewhere safe. By morning, worry turned to fear. Police patrols were dispatched, joined by volunteers and local farmers. They followed the road through mist and thin mountain rain until one of them saw the glint of headlights through the fog. The bus sat neatly parked at a scenic overlook, engine idling, front lights cutting pale beams through the drizzle. It looked untouched, even peaceful, as if waiting for its passengers to climb back in. The officers approached cautiously. The driver's seat was empty, the door half open. Inside, notebooks littered the floor. Half-eaten sandwiches lay on seats, lunchboxes open, pencils rolling in the aisles. The Polaroid camera rested on a bench, its strap tangled around a thermos. Inside it, one photo cartridge remained undeveloped. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. Every window was closed. The only sound was the low rumble of the engine and the whisper of rain on metal outside the bus. The mud was smooth, no footprints led away, not a single shoe print, not even the marks of children playing. The grass along the overlook was undisturbed when investigators tried to push the bus forward. The tires resisted, as if rooted in place. That afternoon, news spread back to San Isidro. Parents rushed to the site, but authorities kept them behind tape. The teacher's personal items were found still inside. Senora Alvarez's notebook opened to a page labeled Strata Layer Sketches. Mr. Ortega's pen beside it. His journal was missing as night fell. The search widened. Helicopters scanned the canyon. Soldiers climbed along the ridges with flashlights. They found nothing, no sign of the children, no torn clothing, no bodies, no trace of anyone leaving the area for days. The valley echoed with shouts of their names. Dogs sniffed through the brush, circling back confused. The Polaroid cartridge was finally developed by a technician, but the photo came out overexposed. A wash of pale light and faint streaks that looked almost like shapes moving in the fog. The bus was towed to a nearby police lot. Mechanics inspected the engine. It worked perfectly. The fuel tank was full. There was no reason it should have stopped by the week's end. 24 names were listed in the provincial missing persons ledger. 24 families gathered outside the school, praying beneath a banner that read, "We will bring them home." But the valley remained silent. The mountains gave nothing back. Years later, people still spoke of that day as if it had carved a hole in time. The teachers, the children, the laughter that once filled that bus, all gone in a single breath of wind. By nightfall, 24 voices had vanished into the wind, leaving only an echo the mountains never returned. In the days after the discovery of the empty bus, the valley filled with noise, shouting, engines, the hum of helicopters sweeping low through the clouds. The government dispatched soldiers from the nearest base. Search teams combed the slopes. In riverbeds, dogs scoured the underbrush. Volunteers from neighboring towns trudged through the mud, calling names that vanished into the wind before echoing back unanswered. The operation lasted weeks, then months. Camps were built along the ridge where the bus had stopped. Maps were marked, coordinates circled, search routes plotted and redrawn. They covered every kilometer within a 50-mile radius. But no one found a single track, no scrap of clothing, no sign of the 22 children or their 2 teachers. The ground itself seemed to erase evidence. It rained almost every afternoon that spring, washing away footprints before they could be photographed. Families refused to leave. The parents pitched tents by the overlook, lighting candles each night at the spot where the bus had stood. Mothers wrote letters to their missing children and slipped them into cracks in the rocks. Fathers built small crosses and planted them in the soil, believing the valley might somehow guide their children back. When the government called off the official search after 90 days, the family stayed another 90 on their own. Only the arrival of winter snow finally drove them away. By the second year, the story had become an open wound in the country's memory. Newspapers published theories by the dozen. Some claimed the driver had lost control and hidden the children in nearby caves before dying of exposure. Others whispered darker possibilities: kidnappings, cult activity, even secret government experiments. It was, after all, the era of Argentina's dictatorship, when people vanished every week. To many, La Clase de los Valientes were simply more victims of a country where disappearance had become ordinary. Still, the facts did not fit. There were no signs of violence, no tire marks, no evidence that anyone else had been there. The bus's engine had been running, its fuel nearly full. It was as though everyone had stepped out together and been swallowed by the air. Over time, the official line hardened: rockslide or natural accident. The public lost interest, but in San Isidro, the grief never faded. The school where the children had studied was turned into a memorial. The classrooms were left untouched. The chalkboards still bore faint traces of handwriting. In the main hall, photographs of the missing hung beneath the flag. each frame adorned with paper flowers that students renewed every year. Every April, on the anniversary of the trip, the town gathered at dusk. Bells rang 24 times, once for each vanished soul. The families walked together to the canyon, carrying candles and photographs. They stood in silence at the overlook, listening to the wind rush through the valley below. Some swore they could hear faint laughter echoing against the cliffs. They began to call the place La Quebrada del Eco, the echoing gorge, a valley that swallowed sound and returned nothing. As decades passed, the tragedy became legend. Tourists avoided the area. Guides refused to bring hikers beyond the old marker. Locals said the gorge played tricks on travelers. Voices heard in the mist, music drifting where there were no radios. Campers claimed that when they called out, the echo answered with a different voice. On stormy nights, some said, the wind carried the sound of a bus engine turning over and the distant chatter of children singing. By the late 1990s, the mystery had faded from national headlines, but the story lived on in whispers. Younger generations found it online, rediscovering the case through early internet forums. Amateur investigators pored over scans of yellowed newspaper clippings, pointing out inconsistencies. The missing teacher's journals, the single undeveloped Polaroid, the incomplete mileage recorded by the bus's odometer. Others noticed that the driver, Ricardo, had no surviving family and no birth record in local registries. He had simply appeared 1 year before the field trip and vanished with them. As social media arrived, theories multiplied. YouTube channels produced dramatic reenactments. Reddit threads mapped the canyon on Google Earth, tracing supposed geometric patterns in the terrain. Some users insisted the area matched coordinates of a declassified military test zone. Others argued that magnetic anomalies in the bedrock interfered with radio signals, creating what they called a dimensional fold. Ghost hunters posted clips of strange lights flickering over the valley at night. None could prove anything. Through it all, the families aged, one by one. The parents who had once stood at the overlook began to pass away, but they left instructions for their descendants. Keep the candles burning. Keep the photographs framed. Never let the names be forgotten. Even after 4 decades, the school remained exactly as it had been, desks aligned, chalk neatly stacked, lesson plans frozen in time. It became less a building and more a shrine. Some of the surviving siblings organized yearly memorials, inviting journalists and researchers. They placed flowers beside the rusting Polaroid camera displayed in the museum case, the one recovered from the bus. Its final undeveloped film was still preserved in cold storage, too fragile to process without destroying it. One day, the curator would say, technology will let us see what it captured. Outside, the mountains remained indifferent. The wind still rolled through the canyons, carrying the same low hum that locals claimed had started the day the children vanished. It never grew louder, but never stopped. The case file labeled El Incident del Valle del Condor gathered dust in a government archive in Buenos Aires. No one opened it anymore, until, in early 2023, a group of data preservationists scanning old National Police records came across the folder. Inside were water-damaged photos, cassette recordings, and the Polaroid film. They weren't searching for ghosts, only to digitize history before it decayed. But when they fed the files into a new restoration program designed to reconstruct faces from damaged media, something began to emerge that none of them expected. The silence that had held for 40 years began to crack. For the first time since that day in 1981, the valley seemed to whisper again, not through wind or echo, but through code and pixels. 40 years later, the silence broke, not from the mountains, but from a machine built to remember faces. In 2023, more than 4 decades after the students and teachers of San Isidro vanished, the case was little more than a ghost in an archive. Rows of cardboard boxes slept in the basement of the National Historical Police Repository in Buenos Aires, each labeled in fading ink. Most held only brittle papers, reports smudged by moisture, Polaroids that had fused together, cassette tapes half erased by time. A newly formed historical preservation team had been assigned to digitize everything before it crumbled to dust. Their task was routine: scan, catalog, upload. No one expected history to talk back. Late one Friday, technician Lucia Ferrero opened a water-stained envelope stamped Valle del Condor, 1981. Inside were the fragments everyone had forgotten: 22 student portraits, 2 faculty photos, a handful of field trip negatives, and 1 sealed Polaroid cartridge wrapped in brittle tape. The last photo taken on the bus. A tag inside read, "Do not develop. Evidence fragile." Lucia laid the items out under the fluorescent light. The faces of the children, though blurred, still carried the warmth of a spring morning. Uniforms, toothy grins. The awkward pride of posing for a teacher. The colors had faded to sepia. On the back of one photo, someone had scrawled the name, Camila O, and a doodle of a mountain. The team decided to feed the images into a new neural restoration system known as EchoFrame, an experimental AI that rebuilt missing visual data by studying millions of historical photographs. Its purpose was simple: recover lost details, restore clarity. The name came from its guiding idea that every image was an echo waiting to be heard again. The process began slowly. Each damaged photograph was scanned, cleaned, and rendered into the program. On the monitors, the faces sharpened, colors bloomed back into existence. Uniforms regained their pale blue hue. At first, everyone marveled at how precise it was. A student's freckles reappeared. Another's broken shoelace was suddenly visible. For a moment, the children seemed to return, frozen but alive. Then the anomalies began. The first appeared in a group shot taken inside the classroom weeks before the trip, behind the last row of students. EchoFrame reconstructed faint outlines, 2 figures that didn't match the seating plan, standing where the wall should have been. One analyst assumed it was artifact noise from the neural network, but when they overlaid the original scan, the distortion existed there too, buried in the damaged layer of film. The second anomaly came from a photo of the bus parked before departure. As the AI restored the cracked surface, the window reflection cleared. Instead of the schoolyard, the glass showed the silhouettes of mountains and clouds, landscapes that didn't match any view from San Isidro. More unsettling still, several children's faces in the reflection looked slightly different, older, as if years had passed between the photograph and its mirrored version. Lucia frowned. Zooming in on the pixels, the smiles were identical, but the eyes seemed heavier, the skin sun-touched as if weathered by time. It's blending patterns from the training set, a programmer said. Uneasy, it's guessing what's missing. Yet the expressions felt too intentional to be random. They pushed on. Each restored photo revealed something a little stranger. Shadows stretching in directions inconsistent with the lighting. Outlines of small shapes in the fog outside the bus. Blurs that resembled movement caught mid-frame. In one image, a teacher stood at the front of the bus. In the window behind her, faint outlines of children could be seen standing outside, watching. The police log confirmed. That window faced a cliff edge. No one could have been standing there. After days of restoration, only one item remained: the sealed Polaroid. The last photograph ever taken. The cartridge had survived surprisingly well. Sealed tight since 1981, the chemicals were unstable, but the AI Lab's imaging unit could analyze undeveloped film without exposure. Using a laser scanner, they captured microscopic gradients of the dye layers and reconstructed the latent image digitally. On the monitor, lines began to emerge. First the outline of the bus, then the canyon edge, then the tiny shapes of children. As the neural model processed the data, colors bled into the frame: sky, rock, denim, faces. The image took form like a memory surfacing from a dream. There they were, 22 students and 2 teachers, arranged at the canyon rim, smiling, arms around each other. The valley opened behind them, veiled in pale mist, but as the rendering refined, new figures began to appear in the haze beyond the group. At first, they looked like distortions, faint vertical smudges, fragments of light. Then the outlines clarified. More children, dozens, maybe more, standing in the fog behind the class. Their forms were translucent, their faces indistinct, yet unmistakably human. None matched any name from the roster. One researcher gasped, another muttered. The program's pulling faces from nowhere. They ran the reconstruction again, this time offline, isolated from all datasets. The same shapes reemerged, slightly shifted, as if the strangers in the fog had moved closer. Lucia noticed something else. On the canyon wall behind the group, the AI restored a faint inscription, a line of text that hadn't been visible before. Letters formed slowly, almost resisting definition. It looked like handwriting, the curve of chalk or white paint. Only 2 words resolved clearly before the algorithm froze. Segimasaki. We're still here. The lab went silent. No one spoke for several minutes. The hum of the computers seemed louder than ever. Later that night, when most of the team had left, Lucia stayed behind to re-examine the sequence. The system logs showed no errors, no data leaks, no external sources accessed. Everything the AI had produced came directly from the physical scan of that single piece of undeveloped film. And yet, in the metadata of the rendered image, a timestamp had been automatically generated by EchoFrame's algorithm. The moment it completed the restoration, it read 17 hours 43 minutes and 12 seconds, April 12, 1981. The exact minute the bus had last radioed in. She closed the file. The image remained burned in her mind. The children, when the images from EchoFrame went public, they sparked disbelief, fascination, and fear in equal measure. The story reached national news within a week. Some viewers called the restorations miracles of technology. Others called them digital hauntings. Every news station in Argentina replayed the same question. What had the machine really seen? For the first time in 40 years, the Ministry of Interior reopened the official case. The police archives were pulled from storage, scanned, and transferred to the Department of Digital Forensics. Technicians worked through brittle folders and corroded reels, trying to separate myth from data. That's when they found something that had been misfiled since 1981. A cassette recorder, sealed in a plastic evidence bag, its label half peeled. The tag read, "Recovered from bus. Seat 4A." The device was an old portable model, its battery compartment corroded, its tape twisted and stiff. A faint line of dust marked the initials carved on its side. C.O. Camila Ortega. The same name Lucia had found written on the back of one of the restored photographs. She had been the youngest of the group, barely 12, according to school records. She'd loved music and carried her recorder everywhere, documenting class jokes and bird songs. The tape was too fragile to play mechanically. Instead, forensic engineers used a magnetic imaging scanner, a technology that reads magnetic variations without contact, to map every line of the degraded strip. The digital reconstruction took 3 days, converting the decayed pattern of oxide into audio signals. When the file finally played, the room fell silent. At first came ordinary sounds: laughter, the hum of an engine, the shuffle of feet. You could hear the students singing off-key, their voices rising above the wind. The teachers' voices followed, Mr. Ortega counting, Senora Alvarez reminding them not to lean out the windows. Then the audio stuttered. The engine coughed once, twice. A burst of static, and beneath it, something else. It was faint at first, like a breeze through a microphone. Then it grew clearer, layered between the noise of the wind. A whisper that didn't belong. The voice was small, childlike, and eerily calm. It said only 3 words. "We're still here." The sound engineers played it again and again, isolating the frequencies, filtering background noise, confirming that it hadn't been an echo of the children singing. The waveform matched no other voice in the recording. It seemed to emerge from the static itself. By the next day, the AI specialists who had developed EchoFrame requested access to the original restoration data. They wanted to understand how the voice might connect to the anomalies in the photographs. When they cross-referenced both datasets, the visual reconstructions and the newly decoded audio, they found something that shouldn't have been possible in the enhanced image metadata. Every file contained a signature pattern embedded by the AI model, a unique digital fingerprint marking the reconstruction. In the final photo, the one showing the children at the canyon's edge, that signature repeated itself dozens of times, fractal-like, as if the system had generated multiple overlapping versions of the same image. Each layer contained subtle changes, stars in different alignments, shadows shifting direction, rock shapes that didn't exist in the real valley. When they compared the sky reconstructed by EchoFrame with astronomical data from 1981, none of the constellations matched. The stars were arranged in patterns belonging to no known chart. Not northern, not southern. Some glowed in places where no celestial bodies had ever been recorded. The mountain ridges in the background formed outlines that didn't correspond to any in Patagonia. It was as though the AI had reconstructed not what was lost, but what had never been seen on Earth. At the National Laboratory for Image Forensics, chemists examined the remaining Polaroid film. Their report deepened the riddle. Under ultraviolet analysis, the chemical layers of the emulsion showed uneven decay, not gradual fading, but a sharp pause, as though the breakdown had been interrupted halfway through and frozen in place. In simple terms, the film had stopped aging for an unknown length of time before resuming normal deterioration. That's not possible, the lead analyst said during the press briefing, unless the film was stored in conditions outside standard reality. Vacuum, extreme cold, or something else we don't have words for. The announcement reignited global attention. Scientists argued furiously. Skeptics insisted that both the photos and the audio were the product of overtrained algorithms hallucinating details. The AI equivalent of seeing faces in clouds. EchoFrame's model filled missing pixels with statistical noise. One developer wrote, "It's probability, not paranormal, but believers, a loose coalition of psychologists, digital theorists, and families of the lost, offered another view. They claimed the AI hadn't invented anything. Instead, it had reconstructed fragments of something real that lay beyond the visible. A photograph, one researcher said, is a map of light. If the machine could rebuild the light, maybe it also rebuilt what the light once touched." The debate grew stranger when EchoFrame's internal logs were analyzed, each time the system worked on one of the missing students' photos. Its neural temperature, a value used to track randomization, dropped unexpectedly, as if the program itself had begun to stabilize around a fixed pattern, learning faster than designed. When programmers visualized that pattern, it formed what looked like a wave, the shape of a voice, the same wave that matched the phrase "we're still here." By then, the project had drawn attention from both academia and the media. Some called it proof of digital hauntings, others a tragic case of confirmation bias. The truth sat somewhere between the two, shifting like the valley mist. Late one night, Lucia returned to her lab alone. The AI servers were quiet except for the low hum of cooling fans. She opened the restored image again. The smiling children, the teachers, the faint fog filled with half-seen shapes. For a moment, the pixels shimmered, as if recalculating. Then, in the reflection of the bus window, she thought she saw a movement, faces turning slightly toward her, eyes that hadn't been looking at the camera before. She blinked, and the image was still again. On the monitor, the timestamp at the bottom flickered once and reset. April 12, 1981. Lucia leaned back, her pulse unsteady. "It's just code," she whispered to herself, though her voice didn't sound convinced. Outside, the rain began to fall over Buenos Aires, tapping against the glass like static against a microphone. Somewhere in the circuitry, a process resumed, a neural thread looping endlessly through time, trying to fill what was missing. Had the algorithm simply guessed? Or had it glimpsed a world that took them and never let go? Within days of the EchoFrame revelation, The world rediscovered a story it had long buried. Headlines filled front pages in Buenos Aires, London, and Tokyo. AI restores faces of missing Patagonian students. The restored images, 24 figures frozen between fog and sunlight, circulated faster than any official statement could. To some, they were proof of technology's power to resurrect the past. To others, they were proof that the past had never truly left. Within a week, the photographs were everywhere. News anchors debated their authenticity, while paranormal podcasts dissected every shadow and reflection. Forums filled with side-by-side comparisons. Damaged originals beside Echo Frame's digital reconstructions. People zoomed in on the smallest details. The way a child's hair curled, the slope of a smile, the reflection in the glass of the bus. Every pixel was treated like scripture. The families of the missing gathered once more in San Isidro, now gray-haired and trembling with the weight of decades. For the first time since 1981, they saw their children's faces not as fading prints, but in vivid color, alive with light. Many wept openly. One mother fainted when she recognized a mole on her son's cheek, a tiny mark that had never been mentioned in police records and could not have survived the degradation of the negatives. "That's my boy," she whispered. "That's him, not a copy." No expert could explain it. The original film had been waterlogged beyond recovery, its emulsion stripped, even with AI. Such precise details shouldn't have been possible, yet there it was. Proof in the form of a freckle. The photographs became known online as the Ghost Class of Patagonia. Artists painted tributes, documentarians flocked to the valley, and skeptics tore every fact apart. Scientists attempted to recreate the glitch by feeding the Echo Frame algorithm random damaged film. Every result came out distorted, never coherent, never human. Whatever had happened during the restoration of those specific files had never repeated. The lead developer issued a statement. Echo Frame is an algorithm. It cannot feel, interpret, or invent what is not in data, but something inside those images responded as if data were remembering itself. Meanwhile, the families began noticing small coincidences. On the anniversary of the disappearance, candles left in the schoolyard burned twice as long as normal. In one of the classrooms turned memorial, a single desk was found pushed away from the wall each morning despite being locked overnight. Visitors swore the air inside felt charged, like static before a storm. Lucia tried to move on. She gave interviews, published research papers, and repeated the same calm explanation. Echo Frame did what it was trained to do. Nothing more. But she stopped turning her computer on at night. Sometimes, even with the power off, she could hear a faint hum from her monitor. The same soft frequency she'd heard on the cassette recording. The one that carried the whisper. "We're still here." Months passed. The global fascination began to fade. As all viral stories do, the images were archived, documentaries released. Experts moved on to new mysteries. Yet within the walls of the preservation lab, something strange began to happen. Echo Frame's internal servers, which had been powered down after the investigation, started booting themselves. Automatic restart logs appeared in the system monitor, though the hardware was disconnected from any external source. The team dismissed it as residual charge or faulty wiring. Until one night, the system came fully online at 2:14 a.m. Motion sensors in the lab captured faint blue light flickering across the workstations. The security cameras recorded the fans spinning to life, processors humming, and a software of drives activating. No human was present. The AI had reactivated itself. By morning, all terminals displayed the same message: rendering in progress. There were no input files, no datasets, no user commands. The process lasted for 6 minutes and 20 seconds, after which the system crashed completely. Every log file except one was erased. The single remaining file was an image. Its name, final_frame, JPG. When Lucia opened it, her breath caught. It showed a canyon road, recognizable but altered. The same valley where the bus had been found, though the cliffs looked narrower. The light colder. Standing in the middle of the road were 24 figures, the same children and teachers, arranged in 2 rows, older now by perhaps 4 decades. Their faces were unmistakable yet matured, eyes lined, hair longer, clothes faded but whole. Behind them, the sky shimmered with a strange, diffuse light, like dawn and dusk overlapping. Every person in the image faced the camera, faintly smiling. They weren't the frozen, innocent expressions of schoolchildren anymore, but something quieter, like recognition. A knowing look that said they had seen the other side of time and returned only to be remembered. The metadata told an even stranger story. The timestamp didn't read 1981, it read, captured, April 12, 2023, 17 hours 43 minutes and 12 seconds. The exact time Echo Frame had first rendered the final Polaroid months earlier. The same minute the bus's last transmission had gone silent 42 years before. Experts tore apart the file. There was no sign of editing, no trace of human creation. The checksum verified it had been generated natively by the Echo Frame system, not imported. Yet the AI had been offline, power cables unplugged, internet disabled, no path for data in or out. The incident report labeled it phantom render, but among the engineers, another phrase took hold. The machine dreamed. News of the last image reignited the legend. The world called it the first digital haunting. Families held vigils not with candles this time, but with screens, projecting the final frame onto the side of the school building. Children of a new generation stood in silence as the image glowed on the wall. The vanished class, together again, watching over the same town that had never stopped waiting. That evening, Lucia stood alone in the lab. The servers were quiet now, the fans cold. She stared at the printed version of the final image pinned to the wall. Outside, thunder rolled over Buenos Aires. The lights flickered once, twice, for a heartbeat. She thought she heard laughter echo faintly through the speakers. Children's laughter, mingled with the hum of wind, then silence. No one has touched the Echo Frame servers since. They remain sealed in a temperature-controlled vault, labeled as a closed case. Yet each year, on April 12th, the power meters in that room flicker briefly, just enough to register a spark, as if the system wakes for a single moment before sinking back into sleep. Because sometimes the past doesn't return through memory. It finds its own way back through the machines that dream of us.